President Obama once said something that I totally agree with. He said, yes, he did. He said, elections have consequences. They sure do. Yeah, they do. And perhaps you didn't like Donald Trump's tweets or some of his comments, although I would venture to say that some things that were attributed to him by the very biased and reckless media weren't at all what he actually said. But let's just review some consequences of the 2020 election. Now, maybe you're fine with the open borders the Biden administration created by having 94 separate executive orders that stopped the construction of the border wall, ended the stay in Mexico policy, that forced those who wanted asylum to apply in the country of origin rather than being allowed to come into the United States and then get a hearing set, usually years away. Under President Biden, we stopped most of the deportation, even of people who committed violent crimes against American citizens. And we didn't require any documentation of who the people were coming into the country, why they came, where they were going, or even if they had a disease. While U.S. citizens were still being forced to wear masks, get vaccinated, or quarantine if tested positive for COVID, illegal aliens were excused from any of those requirements. Another consequence was that George Soros-financed left-wing prosecutors who implemented the no-bail policy, allowing even violent criminals to get released from jail before the victims of the crime got out of the hospital from being treated from the criminals' attacks. That was crazy. But even if you didn't have a family member die from the fentanyl poisoning brought across the border, or maybe you weren't the victim of a violent crime at the hands of an illegal who shouldn't even be here, you certainly have been impacted by the consequences of the 2020 election. According to Republican members of the U.S. Senate Joint Economic Committee, the typical American family is paying $11,434 more for the same exact standard of living that you had when Joe Biden took office. He claimed he had stopped inflation. He simply has not. In fact, a median-priced home is up 80 to 100% during his 3 years. Gasoline for your car, it's up 60%, and probably will get higher. Food costs are up 21%, electricity 28%, rent is up 20%, and the price of eating out is up 21% on average. Airfare, 31% higher. Natural gas, 30% higher. And baby formula, you know, what Trey has at least 3 times a day, it's up 30%. Now, these are real cost to you. And Joe Biden says the reason that food makers are putting fewer chips in the package, that's why inflation is there, and that a Snickers bar is smaller than it used to be. That's simply not true. The reason that costs have skyrocketed have to do with the consequences of the last election. This administration has stepped up regulations on businesses, regulations that, like it or not, Donald Trump slashed. You see, here's how it works. When a business has to spend more time answering government bureaucrats about how diverse it is or what it's doing for climate change, that costs money. And you know what happens? That cost gets passed on to you. Joe Biden declared war on fossil fuels. That means we went from being energy independent during the Trump years, first time in 75 years, to again begging Middle East and South American adversaries for oil. And it's not just costing you more at the pump. It costs more for the farmer to run his tractor, and then for the truck to take his crops to the processor, and then for more trucks to get the finished products to the store. And oh, by the way, it costs the store more money to keep the lights going. And because Democrat prosecutors stopped prosecuting people who are robbing and shoplifting the stores, all those losses get passed on to you, the paying customer. And the cost of crime going up means your insurance costs more. And that's where some of that extra $11,434 that the typical American family is paying, that's where it's going. Now, unless you just aren't bothered by losing $11,434 a year in your pocket, you might want to think very carefully about who you'll vote for. So let this be a surprise. I pay tribute to President Barack Obama for a very accurate observation. Elections have consequences, and the one this year will have some serious consequences. Even if you're fine with the current president using the government police agencies, going after his opponent in the most blatant form of election interference, I cannot imagine that you feel good about what is happening to your own family and simply putting food on your table, gas in your car, and clothes on your back. As you think about the election this year, just remember, elections really do have consequences. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I hope you will now. The button is just below this video, and there's a little bell next to it. If you click on those, YouTube will reluctantly start letting you know when we've got a new video uploaded.